We begin in Europe, where Italy is hosting the Group of Seven, or G7 nations. President Joe Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky are scheduled to meet and sign a new bilateral security agreement on the sidelines of the G7 summit. Now, the pact will commit both countries to a long-term defense and security cooperation framework, and it's expected to be an executive agreement, which will make it less formal than a treaty and non-binding for any future presidents. Confirming the agreement, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan stated that it would not include the direct deployment of U.S. troops to Ukraine. He also called it a bridge towards Ukraine's potential inclusion into NATO. Now, on the sidelines of the summit, President Biden is also expected to press G7 leaders to move forward with a complex strategy to convert seized Russian assets into a new funding source for Ukraine. Now, this will enable billions of dollars to be allocated for Kyiv to bolster its defenses in the year 2025 and beyond.
This is a critical moment. The stakes of this war are high, and Ukraine's survival is on the line, but so is all of our security. None of us would want to live in a world where Putin prevails. We would all be less secure if tyrants think that they can trample borders and cow their neighbors.
Now, as part of the latest agreement, Washington plans to hold consultations with Ukraine immediately following a future attack by Russia. However, this agreement will not include a mutual defense clause, which would otherwise commit the United States to defend Ukraine militarily in the event of another attack. Now, while President Zelensky has welcomed these commitments, he's also emphasized that they do not promise full NATO membership, which includes a mutual defense of allies under Article 5. Now, the proposal continues to be logistically complicated and legally thorny, as some European officials still harbor doubts about its viability. However, NATO allies have increased their support for Ukraine, including allowing Kyiv to fire Western weapons into Russian territory. Over the last 2 weeks, France, Germany, the UK, and the United States have allowed President Zelensky to attack Russian military targets inside Russia, and the move has already paid massive dividends. President Biden remains hopeful, however, the G7 will unify around this framework that will provide the much-needed resources to fortify Ukraine and serve as a bulwark against an increasingly bellicose Russia. From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.
Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who's invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost. Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As the G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who is invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost.